I see the born of no return. Sister, hey now, can't you see we're rushing for the end? I see the point of no return. Now I see the point of no return. It's just
Well, good evening, everybody. It's Tuesday again. Tuesday, September 30th of 2014. My name is Gary Hendershot. You're listening to Wide Awake News on the Rents Radio Network, and you betcha, for about the next hour or so, I'm going to be barking at the moon as if anybody out there was really listening or even cared. Well, let's see. Hot item in the news right now. It looks like the United States has recorded its first case of this Ebola virus that's been ravaging Africa. Now, this is how this article, this is from RT. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed on Tuesday, so that's just today, that the first domestic case of Ebola was diagnosed in the United States of America. And we've had some folks flown in who were infected. They were flown in from Africa to places here in the United States for emergency treatment. But this is what we might refer to as patient zero, the first party who has been initially diagnosed with Ebola here in the United States. By Tuesday afternoon, the CDC received preliminary blood test results back confirming that the patient was struck with the deadly disease. Again, we have to do the public health follow-up to see what contacts where this individual has gone. And the interesting thing is they have not released his name. So if you might have done some business with this fellow or whatever, they're counting on his recollection of where he's been and who he might have come in contact with to make the rounds and notify folks, hey, you may have been exposed. Now, although health officials tend to play it down, it's becoming more and more apparent that this particular version of the Ebola virus has at least a limited ability to be transferred airborne. In earlier Ebola outbreaks, you had to come into direct contact with bodily fluids for the infection to move. But this time around, it appears that if you're in the same room with someone infected by Ebola and they happen to sneeze, and you get some of it on you or breathe it in, if you happen to touch a doorknob that this person has sneezed on, there is a possibility that you may indeed become infected. Now, this fellow who has become infected, they have released the fact that he had recently traveled to Liberia. We don't yet know whether he was a health worker or if he had business dealings in Liberia or perhaps we really don't know. They have not released all the facts. Other than that, yes, we have our first locally diagnosed case of Ebola at the Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas. So mark that on your calendar. We now have our first diagnosed case of Ebola here in the United States. Now, in Africa, this disease has been killing an inordinate number of people. I mean, even going back in history to one of the worst pandemics mankind can remember, the Spanish influenza back after World War I. A lot of people became ill with the Spanish influenza, which apparently was really gestated somewhere here in the United States and taken overseas by our military. But that's neither here nor there. Even though an awful lot of people became infected with what was referred to as the Spanish flu, the kill rate was only about 3%. So about 3% of the people who contracted that particular influenza that killed so many. As a matter of fact, the Spanish flu killed more people than bullets in World War I. Yeah, something to think about. So a bug got more people than all the bullets people threw at each other during World War I. But still, it was only 3% of the people who became infected that succumbed to the infection and died. This Ebola thing, a little scarier. I've seen a number of different statistics, and depending on whose statistics you want to buy into, it looks like anywhere from 50 to 90% of the people who become infected with this Ebola die. I mean, this thing, it's almost a death sentence. When you get it, you're rolling the dice. Matter of fact, you got better odds at the crap tables than you do if you catch Ebola. So nothing to just dismiss. This is a very serious disease. Now, it does appear that the white people who were extracted from Africa, brought back to the United States, and given premium quality Western medical care, did recover. There were a couple notable cases. A Spanish priest became infected, but it appears he wasn't really treated using Western techniques until he was pretty much gone anyway. He didn't make it. Bottom line is, the white people that were extracted from Africa, brought back to the United States and or Europe, and treated with the best Western medicine has to offer, which basically means you isolate the person, you make sure that they have plenty of fluids, because one of the ways this disease kills you is you lose all your body fluids. I mean, it's coming out of every orifice. I know that. How do I say this and not offend people on primetime radio? I mean, you got stuff coming out of both ends, okay? And you got stuff coming out of your eyes, you got stuff coming out of your ears. I mean, you're losing all your bodily fluids. So the idea is they keep you infused with fluids. Perhaps they even, give you blood if you need blood. And of course, they use a regimen of experimental antivirals. In Africa, they do not have these. They don't have the ability to provide that level of care. So it may be that the mortality rate of these infections is based on the ability of the locals to provide care. So it might just be that if this disease does come to the United States, deaths might be somewhat less scary than the 50 to 90% that we're seeing in Africa right now, because we have the ability to provide better quality care, at least for now. As long as onesies and twosies are all that we have to deal with, we can handle it. Suppose 6 months from now, there are thousands and thousands of people in the United States infected with Ebola. Do you suppose our medical system would do any better than what the Africans are able to provide? It's a tough one. Frankly, my crystal ball is pretty cloudy on that one. I really don't know. I do know that this particular disease is devastating countries in Western Africa, countries like Liberia. It's so bad in Liberia that their government may fail. I'm hearing all sorts of conspiracies that this was something created by the U.S. and we want to depopulate that area and cause civil unrest and destroy the governments of that area because these areas of Africa are rich in resources, and we'd like to be able to swoop in there after everybody's died off from Ebola and steal their resources. The terrible thing is that considering some of the evil things this government that represents itself as representing me, it has done some really nasty stuff over the years. It's almost believable that, perhaps some crazies, I have a hard time thinking that, Obama can consider anything beyond his next golf match, so I don't give that guy credit for being able to plan anything that's sophisticated. But, might there actually be people within the United States government or perhaps some of the European governments that are so cynical, so incredibly evil that they would actually create a disease this devastating with the purposeful intent of depopulating an area of Africa that they find interesting and amusing. On that one, you're going to have to make up your own mind. I can't tell you what to think on that. I hear all the rumors. I'm going to get all kinds of people saying, "Oh, Gary, you should come right in. You should just tell them, government did it. It's all a government conspiracy." When we start seeing conspiracies under every freaking rock, that's when we've gone a little bit over the edge. I've not seen the hard and fast evidence that convinces me that is true. But yeah, I have to agree with those supporting such arguments that this government has done some dirty things in the past, and I can't really put it past them. They might just be capable of doing something like that. Also here in the United States today, in one day, we had 2 school shootings. Yeah. The gun grabbers are going to be out in droves. Just, keep an eye out for it. It appears that this morning, a couple of male students outside Albemarle High School in Albemarle, North Carolina, got into some kind of an argument, and one of them pulled a gun and shot the other. It was not a life-threatening wound, but obviously, anytime a shooting occurs, particularly, when it's on school grounds, it becomes news. Apparently, the shooter hung around and surrendered himself to police, dutifully turned himself in. So, although, it was obviously a heated enough argument that somebody thought it necessary to pull a gun and shoot. Again, I don't know what the circumstances were. For all I know, the guy that got shot was, had his hands on the fellow with the gun and was threatening him. I don't know. Hard for me to judge that one. We'll just have to wait and see. But it appears that in Kentucky, there was a little bit more ominous incident. Police and SWAT teams flooded into Fern Creek High School in Louisville, Kentucky, after reports of shot fired. At least one student was injured. A witness basically said somebody very carefully took aim and took a shot at this one individual, shooting them in the stomach. The shooter most likely fled the scene after the incident. It will take some time to secure the building and ensure everyone is safe. Okay, it's a school that houses some 1,400 students. Interesting thing is, is the way they brought the kids out of the school. And I don't know if this offends you, and maybe I'm just sensitive to such things. I don't know. But as they were marching the kids out of the school to safety, they had them marching out with their hands over their heads like they were getting ready to just march into the gas chamber. Now, I'm not sure that is an appropriate message to give these kids in a situation like that. I mean, I'd be down on my knees. I'd be ducking and covering, oh well, what can I say? I was not amused when I saw this picture of them ushering the kids out of the school after the shooting with their hands on their head like they were, guilty or suspected of something. They're supposed to be taking these kids to safety, and instead they're marching them out like they're marching them to a prison camp. That just bothers me a little bit. All right. Also in gun news, Governor Moonbeam Brown of California. Yes, our favorite Grateful Dead fan, Jerry Brown, signed a bill making California the first state that allows family members to ask a judge to remove firearms from a relative who appears to pose a threat. Now, I'm not sure how many of my audience might have been through a nasty divorce or maybe have close kin that's been through a nasty divorce. And whenever, husband and wife are getting ready to split, there's always a lot of finger pointing and yelling and screaming and, who gets this, who gets that, I'm not sure about this one. Here again, I'm sure there are some very good arguments, oh, my husband has threatened to shoot me, or something of that nature. I'm sure there are some very good arguments for this, but I think there were already laws on the books where if somebody is an immediate threat, you can get a restraining order placed on them. And in some states, if there was a restraining order placed on somebody, the police may indeed confiscate their firearms. But, the problem with legislation like this is that it's incremental. They're just incrementally taking a little bite at a time out of that Second Amendment. And for a lot of us, it's a case of, hey, you either believe in your heart that Americans have the right to keep and bear arms, and that the government shall pass no law that infringes on a person's right to keep and bear arms. You either believe that or you don't. So, it's either the law of the land that thou shalt not mess with anybody's right to keep and bear arms, or you believe that through government edict, we should just be able to bend the Constitution to suit today's political expediency. Let's see, how am I doing here on time? I got a couple of minutes. I can get through this next segment here. In other gun news, this is on a more positive note. There is a restaurateur in Cajun country down in Louisiana who wanted to pay back. He wanted to give back to the police that he feels protect his community. So he set up a sign in his window. He says, if you come in here packing heat, you get a 10% discount. He figured, okay, he'd attract all the cops. All the cops come in, buy lunch from him. Well, not only did a lot of the cops come in, but a lot of gun owners who were sick and tired of being shunned by so many restaurants who got a sign posted out there say, hey, if you're packing heat, go someplace else. We finally found a place where our business is welcome. And bottom line is, this fellow's pro-gun stance has increased his business 5 times. So this guy is happy as a clam. He says, yeah, the cops are welcome to come on down and get their 10% discount. But if you're an average citizen, this is an open carry state. Unless you're a criminal of some sort, you have a right to be packing heat. You come on down, you get your 10% discount too. His business is apparently booming. Now, personally, I live in the state of Virginia. Virginia is an open carry state. Now, what that means is, as long as you have your weapon holstered in plain view, you don't need any special license. You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need to ask your mama. You have every right in the world to pack your heater as long as it's clearly visible. And, now, you pull it out and point it at somebody, better have a damn good reason. But, as long as it's in your holster, on your hip, in plain view, you have every right to carry it. But a lot of restaurants here, particularly in northern Virginia, the part of Virginia where I live in, this is kind of a liberal stronghold in Virginia. A lot of restaurants would prefer you not come in if you're packing your heater, and they got a sign in the window saying so. So this guy, good on him. I'm hearing the music, so I'm going to have to slide out of here for a few minutes while the studio sells some products to keep the lights burning. But you betcha, I'll be back to do some more barking at the moon right after these important commercial announcements. Alrighty, we're back from that blatantly commercial interruption of the evening's activities. Another point I'd like to make that I think is timely when it comes to firearms in the United States. We just recently had a terrorist beheading. Here again, a lot of this stuff I think is hyped on your evening news to, keep getting you more and more scared, more and more excited. But the hero in that situation was an Oklahoma County Reserve deputy. No, this guy wasn't a cop. He was like an auxiliary deputy. Named Mark Vaughn. But because he was a man with a gun, he is getting very little attention by the big news networks. You betcha. So it doesn't fit into their narrative. What we had is we had a kook. Now, this kook just happened to have recently converted to Islam, so a lot's being made of the fact that, this guy is some kind of a Muslim terrorist akin to Al-Qaeda or ISIS or whatever, and that he was on some sort of a jihad. Frankly, from my point of view, that is, BS with a capital B. But it doesn't matter. He apparently went crazy at his former workplace, walked in, stabbed some poor woman half a dozen times, and then decapitated her. And then turned around, went after another woman, apparently stabbed her a few times. But before he could finish on her, he was shot by this fellow, Mark Vaughn, which brought that criminal activity to an abrupt end. Quite often, incidents where violent criminal activity might escalate into something even bigger and badder than what it turned out to be is stopped by an armed civilian. Gun owners of America would have you believe that it happens 2 million times a year. I'm not sure if the numbers are that big, but even if it was only 100,000 a year or only 1,000 a year, it would still make a very strong argument for more average citizens to be packing heat. Rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Now, do you live in the Northeast? You live in the Northeast section of the United States? You getting ready for a really cold winter? Well, if you are a customer of something called National Grid, now I assume National Grid is the name of an electric company, Apparently, this is a fairly big electric company. I've never done business with them personally, so you might want to check your bill and see if you're doing business with them. The company recently filed with the state to adjust rates for the winter and says bills could rise by 37%. 37%. Yeah, 37%. Okay, so one day, this is wild. 37%. Tell me something. Has your pay gone up 37% in the last 10 years? I mean, have you gotten a 37% raise over the last 10 years even? For a lot of us, just the opposite is true. For a lot of us, we've taken a pay cut of 37%. Some of us even more than that. But this electric company seems to think that they're entitled to a 37% rate increase, which will probably go into effect along about November. So if you live in the northeast section of the United States, you might want to take a look at your electric bill and see if you're doing business with somebody called National Grid. If you are, you might want to start investing in some solar panels now before you get hit in the back of the head with the 2x4. Oh, boy, here's one of my favorite topics. I love this fracking thing. Now, the fact of the matter is, if sane and rational people were doing fracking in the right areas, using the right fracking materials, fracking would probably not be so god-awful horrible. The problem is these fracking companies, these companies that do this injection-type drilling. They drill a hole down into the ground real deep, and then they inject a high-pressure fluid down in there, and that breaks up the rock and apparently releases more gas and oil. And this is how they're getting oil out of the shale deposits. Problem is, these fracking companies have made deals with Guido, who couldn't figure out what the heck he was going to do with all this carcinogen, cancerous-causing stuff that has been laying around his chemical plants for decades. Because it used to be they just dumped it in the lake, but now such things are being monitored. So he's looking for a good place to hide all this toxic waste. Well, these fracking companies are saying, well, hey Guido, for a little under the table, we can make that stuff disappear. We can make that problem disappear for you. Such a deal we got for you. And they're using that stuff and injecting it down, and they're using that as part of their fracking material. Needless to say, that the fluids, once they're pumped back up, are in many cases not just absolutely toxic, so toxic you don't want to be anywhere near this stuff. Some of the stuff is even radioactive, okay? I mean, the contaminants from these fracking materials is nasty. There are some indications that this fracking activity, when it's performed in the wrong geology, can cause earthquakes. There have been cases recorded where fracking in the wrong area can set up a trembler. There have also been instances, particularly up in Pennsylvania. There's been a lot of this noted in Pennsylvania, some of it out in the west, out in Wyoming, where the fracking activity has contaminated groundwater. So the problem is these people are so damned greedy that, they're not using common sense in the application of what might actually be a useful technology if it was used properly. Like so many technologies, used incorrectly, it can cause a lot of problems. Used properly, it can be beneficial. That's how I see this fracking stuff. Well, now West Virginia has given approval to do fracking beneath the Ohio River. So now there are going to be companies leasing out property to do drilling under the Ohio River and frack under the Ohio River. Now that in and of itself sounds a little bit scary, but it's even more scarier when you realize how many millions of people get their drinking water from the Ohio River. This is yet another accident waiting to happen. could impact the drinking water of as many as 300,000 people directly, and by extension, perhaps as many as 2.5 million people. At what point do the risks outweigh the possible gains? See, unfortunately, when all you're looking at is the almighty dollar, and you don't have that piece of the puzzle in your equation, we end up with stuff like the Gulf oil blowout, BP's little disaster in the Gulf. We wind up with things like Fukushima, the gift that keeps giving. You know, your great grandchildren might have 5 years taken off their life expectancy because of the long-term effects of the radiation coming off of Fukushima. These decisions have long-term costs that everybody seems to be ignoring in favor of very short-term and very limited financial gains. And once again, I'm hearing that music. I'm going to have to slide out of here for a couple minutes while the studio sells a little bit more product. And I'll be back to do some more barking at the moon in just a few moments. Alrighty, let's. That's good. The bumpers sometimes get a little bit too long. I got an awful lot to try and cover here, and I only got about 12. I don't have time for a long bumper tonight. I got an interesting article from Zero Hedge. Now, this Zero Hedge guy, I kind of admire. He puts out a lot of really interesting articles, and some of the articles that I get the best giggle out of are his historical comparisons. He does a lot of these, and this was one that I really thought was cool. Did you know? This is one of those. You are a redneck but did you know that the U.S. is now 50% more unequal than ancient Rome, even including the slaves? What does that mean? Unequal. Unequal. I don't understand. What are you talking about, Hendershot? Get real. Okay, well, here's the facts. In every economy, be it, I don't care what ism you apply to it, whether it's capitalism or socialism or communism, what happens is you always get a small minority of the population who gravitate to lofty perches. Okay? Here, in the United States or in most of Europe, we refer to them as the 1%ers. That top 1% of the population that just seems to have way more than any rational human being needs to have. Well, when ancient Rome fell, that top 1% of their population controlled roughly 16% of the wealth of Rome. So they were sitting pretty, I mean, if you're part of a very small minority of the population that's controlling 16% of the wealth, you're doing pretty good, Life is good. At the founding of America, the founding of the United States, back 1774, that top 1% of the population, and yes, George Washington, by the way, was one of those 1%, okay? The founders of this nation were the 1%ers, all right? So before you think all the 1%ers are, just evil SOBs, remember that this nation was founded by the 1%ers. But at the time the United States was founded, that top 1% of the population only controlled 7% of the total wealth of what became the United States. So, we had a more egalitarian society. The wealth was spread out a little more broad. By 1860, the period marked by the American Civil War, That top 1% controlled 10% of the wealth of the nation. By 1929, marked by the Great Collapse, what had previously been referred to as the Great Depression. I think what we're in right now will probably be called the even greater depression, but that's neither here nor there. By 1929, the period marked by the Great Depression, that top 1% of the population controlled 22% of the wealth of the nation. So wealth had stratified into very few hands. Now, after World War II, we had a big booming economy, and we were the only industrialized nation left on the face of the earth. So the United States as a whole was doing very, very well. And by 1960, that top 1% of the population was pushed back down to controlling only about 10% of the nation's wealth. So once again, the wealth was spread out a little bit more evenly. Average Joe was doing pretty good. Okay, so he wasn't one of the 1%. He drove a Ford instead of a Cadillac, but you know what? Life was good. Life was pretty good. Today in America, now this is just since 1960. That's not that long, okay? I remember 1960. I was there. So it's not that long ago. Today, we're back to having that 1% control 22% of the nation's wealth. Roughly equal to where it was just before the Great Depression, and significantly greater than the percentage controlled by the top 1% during the Roman Empire period. Just a little history for you to think about. Is that going to keep you up tonight? Probably not. But it is something interesting to consider. Ron Paul, I'll tell you, sometimes, you got to either love the guy or hate the guy. Obviously, as with most politicians, there are some points that he makes that I appreciate, some points I don't. To be perfectly honest with you, the libertarians scare me to death because I believe it's, bring on the clowns time. If we ever get to a point where libertarians actually control this nation, we will be in deep doo-doo because that top 1% will wind up with half of the wealth of the nation because libertarians do not believe in any sort of government controls of that sort. The borders will be wide freaking open because libertarians do not believe in national borders. The kind of laissez-faire capitalism proposed by most libertarians reeks of absolute fascism. But I have to balance that by saying that we have slipped so far over the other side of the rainbow that it might be a good idea to have a few years of libertarian governance to kind of bring it back towards the middle a little bit. Once you've gone so far in one direction, maybe you need this absolute opposite for a little while to try and drag you back into reality. But here recently, Ron Paul has gotten his name back in the news by promoting secessionism. Secessionism. That basically, Ron Paul is out there stumping, talking about how it is the right of the states within these United States to take a look at their involvement with the federal government and say, we not be getting such a good deal anymore. We think we want to split off, kind of like Scotland, and Scotland is making people think seriously about this. And, the Scots did not win in their bid for independence. A lot of people say there was a little horseplay with the voting. Maybe Diebold got hold of the voting machines or something. It looks like they had an election there, kind of like in Florida or maybe in Ohio. A lot of questions about the vote in Scotland, and some folks are talking seriously about demanding a recount by an independent third party because, it is kind of funny. Here, you're getting ready to split off from a government, and the government that you're trying to split off from is the one who's in charge of counting the votes to determine whether or not you're going to split. Yeah. It's kind of like, the way we handle terrorism in the Middle East. We support the terrorists that are going to kick the ass of the guy whose ass we want kicked, but then we have to go kick our buddy's ass because I know, it gets so confusing sometimes. That's one of the reasons why I'm glad I'm just a country boy and I don't have to deal with all those highfalutin decisions. But yeah, Ron Paul is out there saying, hey, Americans who embrace secession are acting in a grand American tradition. And I'm going to agree with Ron Paul on this one. I think it would maybe send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. that might get those boys, if not under control, at least make them walk a little more carefully if there were some serious secessionist movements within the United States. I doubt very seriously if even an independent-minded state like Texas, I doubt very seriously if they could actually pull it off, because as a quasi-student of history, I remember a little fracas that went down in the 1860s, and it seems that's been tried. And these federales, they got the idea that, they got a right to use guns to bring you back into the fold. So, Ron, you may indeed be right, but you may also be wrong. I'm not sure. A secessionist movement? Hey, I would like to see a secessionist party. I really would. I would like to see on the ballot, do you want to secede from the United States? I'm not sure it would get coverage on the evening news, but at least it'd make them stop and think on K Street and Capitol Hill. This is interesting. The Northeast, we were just talking about how the Northeasterners were going to wind up paying 37% more for the electricity. Well, this might be part of the reason. The Northeast, once the nation's political engine that produced presidents, House speakers, and so on, is losing clout in Washington as citizens flee the high-tax region. Gee, I can't imagine why I'd want to move out of the Northeast and move to a low-tax state like maybe Texas or Missouri or Kentucky. One of the states where, I get to keep a little bit more of my hard-earned money. But it appears that 11 states have lost a total of 141 House members. So that Northeast corridor that used to be the home of the effete, impudent snobs, as Spiro Agnew would have referred to them, is actually losing clout. They are losing representation in the House of Representatives. States like Texas and Kentucky and Missouri, which historically have had a much lower state tax rate, are gaining in population as people migrate from these high tax areas. Now, what I'd like to know is, where you guys pay the higher taxes, are they at least fixing the potholes in your road? Because here in Virginia, I seem to be paying a hell of a lot in taxes, and they can't even seem to patch the potholes. Oh, well, man, I tell you, I'm running out of time. This hour went really short tonight. I've still got a couple of articles here I wanted to, let's see, which is the one that's the most egregious? I really wanted to talk about Netanyahu. Oh, well, I'm hearing the music. Doggone it anyway. I had about a half a dozen more articles here I wanted to try and get through tonight. But, hey, they're bringing out the hook. They're dragging me off the stage. This is Gary Hendershot barking at the moon on Tuesday, September 30th, 2014. I'll talk to you again next week. Good night, all. All righty, so you guys haven't had enough of me for one night? I did have, holy cow, I really bit off more than I could chew tonight. I've still got quite a few more articles to get through. All right, let me see if I can get through this last group of articles here, because some of these are pretty thought provoking. Something that definitely should stop and think about. This is an article out of RINF.com, RINF.com, RINF.com. Did you know that LA cops, these are policemen in Los Angeles, kill one person every week? I don't know about you. That seems a little excessive to me. Let's see here. Police in Los Angeles County have killed at least 589 people since 2000, according to a report by the Los Angeles Youth Justice Coalition. Last year, police killings constituted a staggering... This is a scary statistic. Last year, police killings constituted a staggering 7% of all homicides in L.A. County. Meanwhile, the share of the county's homicides committed by the police has more than doubled. National crime rates have dropped to the lowest levels since the 1950s. So crime is down. Violent crime is way down. But the incidences of police killings of American citizens is way up. Now, what the hell is going on with that? I'll tell you what, you ain't in Mayberry anymore, that's for sure. During the period between 2007 to 2014, when 315 people were killed by police, at least 97% were male, 82% were black or Latino, 52% were under the age of 30, at least 19 were mentally ill, autistic, or deaf, 9 were running away, 8 were threatening to kill themselves, but were instead killed by officers who were called to prevent their suicides. Do you live in L.A.? Why? This militarization of police is a national epidemic. It just so happened that I had facts and figures for L.A. If you really think it's any better where you live, maybe you should check the facts and figures on your area, in your area. I just happened to find an article that provided the facts and figures on L.A. Don't think that this is just a problem in L.A. So what's the problem here? What's going on? Well, maybe this is the problem. Okay, now I want you to stop and think about this. U.S. court says it's okay for police departments to refuse to hire someone who is too smart. How about that? Isn't that precious? Ever wonder why cops yell, "Quit resisting," as they're beating you on the head? It's because they're so stupid. Let's see. The standard range of scores applies for police officers. The average score nationally for police officers is 21 to 22, the equivalent of an IQ of about 104, or just a little bit above average. A perfect score on the Wonderlic is a 50. In 96, Robert Jordan from Connecticut and 500 others underwent a written screening process. Several months later, Jordan learned that the city of New London had begun interviewing candidates. After not hearing from him, he inquired and was told he was passed over because he was just a little too smart to be considered as a police officer. And now the courts have decided, well, that's perfectly reasonable. It is perfectly reasonable for the police department to discriminate in their hiring practices against folks who have more than a room temperature IQ. So when you wonder why the state of affairs with the militarization of police is what it is, consider that. You can't be bright and be a cop. This one is, from the almost too funny to believe category. The FBI is trying to scare the public into believing that iPhone privacy and security features are somehow dangerous. Now, did you hear the big announcement that all pedophiles are going to run right out and buy an iPhone 6 now? When the FBI and the National Security Agency come out saying that hey, Apple and Google, your phones are just so secure that they're giving us problems. It's probably in the national interest that you reduce the security of your phones. It makes me think that the big shots at NSA and the FBI probably have bought a lot of Apple stock, and this is kind of a backdoor promotion for Apple, to help them sell more of these iPhone 6s. And in reality, if they want what's in your phone, they'll get it. Believe me, I know for a fact they will get it. iPhone 6. The only thing about an iPhone 6 is that Apple does not have immediate access to a backdoor key. Can the Apple 6 be cracked? Oh, you betcha. You betcha. It might take 5 minutes to crack the iPhone 6 instead of the 3 minutes that it takes to crack the iPhone 5. But, if there's really something on that phone that I want, I'll have it. More news on iPhones. Have you heard this one? The bendy gate. Here the NSA and the FBI are out there promoting the Apple iPhones and this new Google phone because they've got such tough encryption. And on the other side, you got a bunch of techno nerds saying, wait a minute, if you flex that phone a little bit, damn thing snaps in two. Well, according to the Register, now I don't know, Consumer Labs apparently ran some tests on the new iPhone. They compared it to a Samsung Galaxy Note and an HTC, whatever an HTC is. I think that's another smartphone from another manufacturer. Apple is apparently they were able to apply like 90 pounds of force to the Apple before it cracked, and that was as good as any of them in the sampling. They tried in 10-pound increments for 30 seconds before releasing it until the mode hit deformation level. All of the phones we tested showed themselves to be pretty tough. This is the Consumer Reports results on this. All the phones we tested showed themselves to be pretty tough. The iPhone 6 Plus, the more robust of the new iPhones in our testing, started to deform when we reached 90 pounds of force and came apart with 110 pounds of force. With those numbers, it slightly outperformed the HTC One, which is largely regarded as a sturdy, solid phone, as well as the smaller iPhone 6, yet underperformed the Samsung Galaxy. Okay, so, if you really, really, really want a super tough phone, you buy the Samsung Galaxy, but the difference is nominal, and frankly, you shouldn't be bending these things with 90 degrees of force anyway. It's a phone, not an ab exerciser. Much to do about nothing. iPhone's in the news again. I'll tell you, Apple couldn't pay for such good advertising. I don't care what they say about me as long as they spell my name right. That's Apple's point of view. Let's see. Ukraine ceasefire tested. Ukraine ceasefire tested as 9 soldiers were killed in a Donetsk clash. Yeah. through the eastern Ukrainians. Though the eastern Ukrainian ceasefire is by and large holding, some new skirmishes have broken out. Ukraine reported 9 of its soldiers killed and 27 wounded in clashes around the Donetsk airport, which they continue to hold throughout the war. Bottom line is, the Ukraine ceasefire is still holding. Now, we don't know what's going to happen this winter. The Ukrainians, the government forces in Kiev, are arming up. Okay? They are rebuilding their military capability. They're buying armed drones as well as surveillance drones. They're buying additional hardware. They have help from, shall we say, Western influences in the form of military advisors or perhaps even mercenaries. And it's been announced that shipments of gas to Ukraine have been reduced by the Russians. I would say that right now the ceasefire in Ukraine is tenuous but holding. But no telling what could happen at almost any time. You know, it's just that's a hard one to put a call on. You know, we got so many little hot spots, you know, where World War III just might pop up, and you know, playing like whack-a-mole trying to keep them down. And one of my favorite guys, Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking at the UN Assembly today, presented a black and white and upside-down worldview in which aggressors are victims and victims are aggressors, yeah. Netanyahu deployed fear-mongering and Islamophobic language to deflect attention from Israel's aggression in Gaza this summer. Look, you're a people. You've got a hunk of land. You got a bunch of neighbors, okay? Some of your neighbors you like, some of your neighbors you don't like, but you know what? You get along, and you are a nation. You are the nation of Palestine. For a couple of, at least 1,500 years, the nation of Palestine existed with Muslims, Jews, Christians, and atheists living harmoniously, doing business in one of the best locations in the Middle East for the conduct of trade. And trade was good. There was a vibrant merchant class that were moving goods all over the Mediterranean out of Palestine. And then after World War II, along came, something called Israel. Well, initially it was just a little bitty enclave, and they were the new neighbors. This was a fairly cosmopolitan environment, so these new guys were kind of invited in. Nobody thought anything until all of a sudden, 10 years later, they started making unconscionable demands, and they started saying, hey, God gave us this piece of dirt. You who have lived here for the last 500 years or 1,000 years or 1,200 years or whatever, you got to move to make room for us, God's chosen people. At this point, this upstart nation, this apartheid creation of the UN and the Rothschild banking cartel, known as Israel, which has absolutely nothing to do with the ancient Hebrew peoples who called themselves the nation of Israel in the Bible, has acquired almost all the lands that were formerly Palestine. And they have insisted on rewriting the history of the area to totally exclude any mention of Palestine. This is Israel. This has always been Israel. God gave the Jews this land. That's how it's always been, and that's how it shall be. And they have gone on a genocidal campaign to eliminate the remaining Palestinians from areas where their great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, going on back many, many generations, called home. Periodically, they get a wild hair and just frivolously start bombing Palestinian enclaves. Like maybe somewhere over in Jerusalem on the other side, a couple of teenagers get kidnapped and murdered. It happens in big cities all over the world. It's a shame. You don't want it to happen. But apparently, some teenagers get kidnapped and murdered by somebody. Nobody knows who. And this is used as an excuse to bomb the hell out of people in Gaza, which is on the other side of the country. And the Gazans are saying, you're bombing us because of what? Because somebody way the hell over there did something you didn't like, so you're bombing us? And you betcha, they fight back. Wouldn't you? Under the same circumstances, wouldn't you? So, Israel lobs precision munitions in and blows up schools and hospitals and power plants and manufacturing facilities. Anything that moves in Gaza's got a target written on it. And Palestinians fight back with what they have, basically improvised, homemade bottle rockets. These are some big bottle rockets. They're about 6 feet tall and about 6-inch diameter, made out of plumbing fixtures. And yes, I know how to build such a rocket. They're not that tough to build. They're powered by laughing gas and paraffin, quite frankly. And they've got a range on them of about 10, 15 miles. Could you, if you really wanted to, make one of these rockets in your basement? Sure. They're not tough to do. They really are not that. Matter of fact, they are using a technology that was perfected in military rocketry during the American Civil War. That's how primitive their missile technology is. I understand during the last fracas, they actually did manage to kill one Israeli. Apparently the guy died of a heart attack when this missile landed about 300 feet from him. They're unguided. They have no accuracy. It's basically just a, launch it and pray type of weapon. Maybe you hit something, maybe you don't. The Israelis, on the other hand, have the best stuff that your tax money can buy because, you're paying for the weapons that the Israelis are dumping on the Palestinians. So, in his address to the United Nations, Benjamin Netanyahu had the nerve to stand there and say that when Israel fires its missiles, it's to protect its children. But when the Palestinians fire their missiles, their children are used to protect the missiles. He actually said that. The genocide of the Palestinian people has got to end before it's too late. They're hanging by a thread. All of their ancestral lands have pretty much all been scarfed up. And Israel ain't done yet. They have their heart set on greater Israel, which was the Israel that never existed, not even in the Bible. It's the Israel that was dreamed of by Israeli scholars back in biblical times, of an Israel that extended from the Nile to the Tigris and everything in between. Basically, they wish the entire Middle East. All you Semitic peoples, all you Arabs, anti-Semitic. No, the Semitic people are the Arabs. The people who run Israel are European Khazars. They belong in Poland. They belong in Turkey. That is their ancestral land. These people are no more a part of the ancient Hebrew culture than I am. But always the victim. Poor Israel, always the victim. And those evil Palestinians, they were the aggressors. Yeah. Can you say bullshit with a capital B? with all the various color revolutions going on all over the world, we've got, stuff happening in Libya and stuff happening in Egypt, and most recently, we've had Ukraine, and a lot of these, we can kind of vaguely see the fingers of U.S. interests, European interests. We can almost see the fingers pulling the strings, Even this Ukrainian thing. I mean, one of our lead ambassadors was called, we spent $5 million to buy the Ukraine, and damn it, we want the vote to go our way. We're going to pick who runs Ukraine. Yeah, that's the way the U.S. does it. They by deception, we shall wage war. Yeah, the U.S. has learned its lessons well, and by deception, the U.S. does wage war. Some say that the protests going on in Hong Kong right now are being fueled by U.S. interests and U.S. money. There is no doubt about it, but, the people of Hong Kong should be able to determine their own path. They are indeed right now politically a part of China. Now, I'm not really sure it's a good idea for the United States to involve itself directly in Chinese internal affairs, but I think they're doing it anyway. We'll just have to see. I have no idea. I have no insights into what's going on in Hong Kong. I remember Hong Kong when it was British territory. Yeah, I am getting old, aren't I? But yes, I actually remember when the Brits ruled Hong Kong. And I remember it was gut-wrenching when the British had to cut a deal with the Chinese. But part of the deal the Brits made with the Chinese when they handed the keys back to China after their 99-year lease ran out, part of the deal they made was that, China did agree that the people of Hong Kong were a separate and distinct culture who had been living under British rule for 99 years, and that they would be afforded every reasonable courtesy and allowed self-government. They were intended to be an autonomous region of China. That was the deal the Brits and the Chinese made. It's yet to be determined whether the Chinese will go against the deal and squash the current uprising that's going on in Hong Kong. Here again, my crystal ball is about as clear as mud. I could make some, wag guesses. You know what a wag is? That's a wild-ass guess, But to be honest with you, I'd just soon tell you the truth and admit that I don't know what's going to happen in Hong Kong. Those who are protesting say, we wish to have democracy here. We do not wish to have this top-down rule that we currently have under the Chinese military authority. We would like to have a say in running our own affairs, and we would like to have a more egalitarian society. Will they get what they want? Or will the Chinese military dictatorship squash them like a bug? Keep an eye on that one. It looks like the Hong Kong protesters gave a deadline of tomorrow to see some action on reforms. And you betcha, the Chinese army is keeping an eye on them. There's been a lot of tear gas, some rubber bullets, a few people injured, a couple killed. But so far, I don't think the Chinese have overreacted in Hong Kong as much as American police in Ferguson, Missouri overreacted there. So, are the Chinese the bad guys, the bullies? And clean up your own backyard first before we start pointing fingers at the Chinese, talking about how oppressive those Chinese are on those poor people in Hong Kong. Clean up your own backyard, Americans. You got problems right here at home. When you're perfect, when you've got no government oppression of your own to deal with, when you've got no crazy cops on steroids shooting people for no damn good reason, when you got your own yard all cleaned up, then you can start picking on your neighbor for his dirty yard. Right now, Mr. America, your yard is filthy. So pay attention to your own backyard. Hey, it looks like we're going to be able to stick around in Afghanistan. You know, Obama promised we were going to bring all the troops home, but looks like he's changed the deal. So yeah, it looks like 9,800 troops are going to stay in Afghanistan. Isn't that precious? And we've added 1,600 non-boots on the ground in Iraq. And I understand they're moving about 25 to 2,800 more into Kuwait for regional stability purposes. Look for them to be in Iraq very quickly. The fake terror threat used to justify bombing Syria. Here again, you know, we created ISIS, all right? The United States of America created ISIS, along with some help from the Saudis who are providing financing and the Israelis who are providing military training. So, you know, this ISIS outfit was an extension of U.S. foreign policy. They're using weapons that we took back from the guys that we hired to kill off Gaddafi. Okay? I mean, I know it gets so confusing how this, you know, circular nonsense goes along. We create ISIS to go after Assad. ISIS decide, well, you know, we're not making much progress here against Assad. There's greener pastures over here in Iraq. They've left the back door wide open. Let's go into Iraq. So ISIS comes into Iraq, starts raising hell. The locals in Iraq look around and say, yeah, go team. We don't like those sons of bitches that the Americans put in charge in Baghdad anyway. So we're going to use you guys as cover to take our country back. And that's really what's happening. The ISIS that we're fighting in Iraq is mostly locals who are fed up with the U.S. puppet government that's been installed in Iraq and really just want to take their nation back. Now, we call them ISIS because it's a scary term that gets you all excited, gets you willing to send your blood and treasure once again into Iraq and now Syria to continue 100 years of non-stop warfare. When will there be a generation of U.S. citizens who live in peace for their entire lives? When will that generation come? Sure hasn't been in my generation. Obama's ISIS, who cares? It's all, you know, it's all fictitious, phony baloney anyway. Obama's ISIL strategy is truly against the Assad government. Well, this is, you know, becoming perfectly clear. I mean, hints are already coming out of Washington. Oh, there's just no way we can bring stability to Syria and kick these guys' ISIS ass while Assad is in. They forget so soon that Assad is fighting ISIS also. Assad don't want those guys in his country because they've been nothing but a pain in the ass to him. Actually, Assad would really like to kind of team up with the U.S. to kick these guys' ass. But, you know, that isn't convenient for the U.S. because the U.S. all along has really wanted Assad out. What they fear in Syria is a stable Arab government that has some military capability that is hindering them from their ultimate goal, which is Iran. Iran is the big prize. Syria stands between U.S., Israeli, European interests and the nation of Iran. Syria must be thrown into disarray. We must turn Syria into another Libya, where all the various tribes are fighting each other to see who's going to be in control. Like Assad, hate Assad, hell with it. Who cares? Assad has been able to take a nation that is made up of varying tribes. He's got Sunnis, he's got Shiites, he's got Alawites, he's got Christians, he's got Jews, all living in Syria in relative peace. They get along. They do business. Yeah, they fight and fuss like any family does, but in general, they get along. Oh, we can't be having any of that. We want them Syrian Christians to be fighting against them Syrian Muslims, and we want them Syrian Muslims to be fighting against them Syrian Alawites, because as long as all them Syria factions are fighting against each other, we can easily control them. Divide and conquer. By deception, we shall wage war. And that is how the United States wages war these days. Can you feel it here at home? Can they feel you getting afraid of the brown-skinned man? You, the brown-skinned man, getting scared of the black-skinned man. You, black-skinned man, getting you afraid of the white-skinned man. Can you feel it? Do you feel them dividing us and conquering us, keeping us fighting amongst each other so that we can't turn around and face off against the common enemy of all? Can you feel it? That's what they want to do to Syria. They want to get all the various factions in Syria so busy fighting each other that they can just waltz right through, out the back door, and into Iran, where they will do the same thing once again. Get all those various Iranian factions fighting amongst each other, so that all the riches of Iran and that southern border with Russia will be under their control. And that was the totality of the planned presentation I had for tonight. So at this point, I can actually pay some attention to the chat room. All right. Anybody agree, disagree? Want to take exception to my points of view? Did I miss anything important in the news that I should have covered? More and more like a smart scarecrow show all the time. I'm not sure about that. I know. Well, I did pick on the Jews though, so I'm going to have the Anti-Defamation League sending me hate mail. Every time I come down hard on Israel, come down hard. Anytime I say anything about Israel or Jews, shoot. A couple times ago, I got death threats. They actually threatened my life. I mean, these guys need, they obviously got too much time on their hands. Needless to say, if you, as soon as you're scared of them, they've won. Believe it or not, you are still forming. Yeah, well, actually, I'm fluid. Because there'll be one day when the Arabs will do something crappy, and I'll call the Arabs an asshole, and then a week later the Israelis will act like assholes, and I'll call them an asshole. I call them as I see them. I got Jews constantly telling me that I'm an apologist for the Muslims, and I got news for you, man. I have, the Muslim faith does not sit well with me. Okay, there's a lot about the Muslim faith that I find objectionable, but it's their faith. As long as they practice their faith and don't try to jam it down my throat or cut my head off. I'm not terribly worried about it. I feel the same way about Christianity. There is a lot about Christianity that makes my teeth itch. I just, cannot abide Christianity. It's, the history of Christianity, if you really understand the true history of Christianity, it would scare you to death. But it's not my religion. It's somebody else's. As long as they practice it, don't try and jam it down my throat or don't try and crucify me. I don't mess with them. They're entitled to their faith. People of faith should be left to their faith. Yes, Christianity was conquered by Rome. Christianity as it stands today has no resemblance to the teachings of the man that people refer to as Jesus, whose true name was Yeshua ben Joseph. But that's neither here nor there. I mean, there was a historical character upon which Jesus was based, but most of the Christian faith is wrapped up in Roman theology. It has very little to do with what Jesus truly taught. But Christians do not want to hear that. They've got this book, and they believe that it was written by the hand of God, and they take it so literally that, well, that's their point of view. They're entitled to it. I try not to mess with them any more than I try not to mess with Muslims for their faith, even though I find that faith to be objectionable. But, it's neither here nor there. My point of view on these things, and $5, get you a cup of coffee at that fancy yuppie coffee place. Roman theology borrowed from Egypt and Greece. I mean, Roman theology was an amalgam of just about every nation that they conquered. I sometimes wonder if the Romans had their own culture or if they just integrated all the various cultures that they conquered and that became Rome, kind of like the United States. Topic of weather engineering. There hasn't been anything out there recently that I thought was significant on the topic of weather engineering. I understand that the Air Force, kind of faked that they were shutting down the Alaska HARP facility, and I don't know if that's fact or not. Weather engineering covers a lot of ground. It is a scary technology. Here's how this HARP thing works. I understand about this much of it. I'm not a degreed physicist. I don't really know enough about microwave transmissions to really know. But they have this phased array of antennas that apparently beams a microwave energy up into the ionosphere at such time of day when the ionosphere has stratified into various levels. And what they can do is they can heat up, by pumping energy into the ionosphere, they can heat up an area which then becomes a hot plasma and acts as a mirror. Okay, they can then bounce the next beam of energy that they focus on this mirror. They can use that mirror to bounce energy to a surface area on the planet. Okay, that's one of the techniques they use. One of the other things they can do is they can quite literally cause air to explode in the ionosphere. Now, the air up there is pretty thin, but they're able to create a super hot plasma. We're talking many thousands of degrees. They quite literally pump many, many megawatts of energy into the ionosphere to get it to do this. And what you get is you get like a reverse mushroom cloud. And within a reasonable range, I don't know, 300, 400, 500 miles thereabouts, they can actually cause this reverse mushroom cloud to jump down from the ionosphere and interfere. It's a high pressure system, so they can interfere with a low, like a developing hurricane. And that's how they apparently knock out hurricanes, or so I'm told. Now, with the HARP facility being closed down, it's been hinted that they've now got something that is just so much slicker and better that they can do it faster, cheaper, better, using some new and improved technology. They're saying that the HARP facility was, Cold War era technology that proved the basics, but now they got stuff that can do it just so much slicker, better, quicker, cheaper that they no longer need HARP. That to me is very, very scary, because I'll tell you, every time they pop off one of those bursts that causes a low pressure system to knock out a low pressure system, they create a high pressure system that knocks out a low pressure system. They knock out storm cells with this thing. Every time they do that, though, every action has a reaction. A big chunk of our atmosphere is blown off into space. You know, took a long time for that atmosphere to develop. Every time they fire off this HARP thing, we lose atmosphere to space. It's like they open a door and vent off some of our air. Stop that. That's not good. Okay, you had your fun. Big boys, put your toys away now. Oh, boy. Let's see. Chemtrails. I have seen chemtrails. Okay, I mean, I've seen them. I've seen them do a checkerboard right over my head. I've sat there and watched it. What the hell? That contrail is lasting for an awful long time. Now, I've heard a lot of the theories associated with chemtrails. Frankly, I think chemtrails are a lot of different things. I don't think, somebody who comes to you and says, chemtrails are this, I think is, they're full of shit. I think there are probably different chemical formulations for different purposes. Some of it is probably fairly benign. Some of it might be nefarious. The problem is, here again, we get so caught up in the conspiracy mindset that we want to attach some nefarious purpose to everything. There's this one woman, Deborah Tavares. I mean, believe it, I love her presentations. I listen to everything she does. But, she will make you scared of everything. Everything's out to get you. And, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be constantly afraid. How much atmosphere gets vented? I guess it would depend on, how big, how much energy they pump into the ionosphere. I don't know. See, that's there is so much about this, atmospheric warmth. They're creating these plasmas in the upper ionosphere, and so much about that, and so much about these chemtrails, so much that we don't know, that it's real easy to make ridiculous guesses. And this is one of the, I always pick on this fella Alex Jones out of Texas, because he's another one where he hyperventilates about everything. Well, that is the definition of yellow journalism, when you overemphasize something. It's best to put the facts on the table as best you know them. If you're going to make an opinion, if you're going to deliver an editorial opinion, make sure your audience understands this is my point of view on it. Give them the facts. You can tell them your opinion, but in the final analysis, it should be left to you to make up your own mind. I've got my opinions on a lot of these things, but I don't know that my opinion is any more valid than yours. So on a lot of these things, it's best we just agree to disagree. Yeah, I would agree with that. AJ's hyperventilation is an act. I think to a large degree, Alex Jones knows his audience, and he's playing to his audience, and I've got to give him credit for that. He has built a considerable empire there that I admire very much. So, while I may disagree with some of his methods and some of his presentations, I can say that overall the quality of presentation coming out of that organization has improved dramatically since they got that black fellow, what's his name, Jackson, and the guy with the beard. I don't even know the guy's name, but I love listening to them. So when AJ comes on, okay, I'll listen if he's got a good guest that he's interviewing. But most of the time I'll just turn him off. But if that black guy Jackson or the bearded white guy, I wish I could remember his name, but it slips my mind. If they're doing a presentation, I listen to them because they're actually presenting news in a style that I can kind of identify with. And I think his organization is maturing a little bit. That I think is a good thing. What else we got? What else did I miss tonight? Did I miss any important articles in the news? I mean, there was all kinds of stuff hitting the news. I mean, I didn't talk about that race car driver that ran over the fella and said, "I may never race again." Now all of a sudden he's humble about it. The guy he hit apparently was smoking dope. You know. Entertainment news, I branch off into a little bit of tech news. I'll talk about bendable apples, but I try to avoid what Miley Cyrus is not wearing this week. Yeah, that was actually a pretty interesting article. The White House security fiasco. Actually, there are some people calling for the dismissal of the head of the Secret Service. Obviously their security was not as good as we have been led to believe. It is a little annoying that they're now pushing tourists even further back. It used to be you could get, as a tourist in Washington, D.C., you could actually get pretty close on the sidewalk to the White House. You get close enough so you could actually see the fountain, and you could see people going in and out the front door. You could actually get very close to the White House. Then they expanded the security, and now they've expanded it some more. What can I say? Before too long, I think they're going to build an underground White House if they haven't already. I think there already is about 14 stories under the White House, but that's neither here nor there. Oklahoma murders. Which ones? I talked a little bit about that kook that damn near took that woman's head off. I talked a little bit about that. But Oklahoma murders, I'm not sure what that one's about. A 3D printed car. I did see an article about a 3D printed car, but I looked at the car that the guy printed, and it didn't look like much to me, so I wasn't really sure that one was news. One of the things you need to remember about the EPA, people think of the EPA, they think that's a federal agency, right? I mean, that's an arm of the government, right? No, the EPA is an incorporated entity. They serve the interests of the stockholders. See, one of the things very few people realize that the United States of America is actually USA Inc. We were incorporated after the bankruptcy in 1933. The United States of America is a corporation, I think, in the Bahamas. And you are not a stockholder, okay? Matter of fact, you are an asset of the corporation, and they have mortgaged your soul. Yes, the United States is no longer the United States of your forefathers. The Constitution was long ago cast aside. Well, it's just a lousy piece of paper. Remember, Bush said, unfortunately, he was right. Now, as long as in your mind you hold that to be your contract with this government, as long as you personally hold the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights to be your contract with this government, that contract shall be in force. But by your silence, you allow, if you willingly give up your rights under the Constitution of the United States, you are a good corporate citizen, and you are doing the best for your company, your team. It's 1984 on steroids, folks. Yes, the IRS is a corporation. The IRS was incorporated in Puerto Rico. Yes, CDC and NIH are also privately owned. These are privately owned entities, and you, Mr. U.S. American citizen, are not a stockholder. You are nothing but an asset of the corporation. You are a useless eater if you are not a source of revenue for the corporation. I know. All right, look, I didn't realize this, but I have now been going 50 minutes overtime. This has gotten to be an extremely long presentation. Yes, in light of the Ebola outbreak. Well, I've heard all the rumors that Ebola is a man-made, concocted disease. That they mixed a couple of different RNA sequences to develop this particular version of Ebola. I understand why the CDC would have patents on a viral strain. I understand that. Just because they have patented their sequencing of the RNA does not mean that they invented it. What that means is they sequenced the RNA and they published it. Therefore, by definition, they own the rights to that publication. I have not seen anything that says that the CDC developed Ebola. The NIH apparently has a couple of proposed treatments for Ebola. I mean, we know about this ZMapp stuff that somebody was working on. Apparently, there's a few other things going around. What scares me about Ebola more than the disease itself is that at some point, a guy in a Darth Vader outfit will point a gun at your head and say, "Let me see your proof that you've had the Ebola vaccine. Otherwise, I'm putting you in this van with these other folks. We're taking you off to the internment camp." Okay? Now, if you don't think that could happen here, go back and look at your history. Look what happened during the TB outbreak in the late 1800s in many big U.S. cities. They were quite literally going around rounding people up who did not have this stamp on their hand that indicated that they had been tested and cleared of TB infection. If you didn't have that stamp, they took you away and locked you up in an internment camp to see if you either lived or died. Okay? So, if you don't think that could happen, the problem is the damn vaccine that they give you for Ebola, for all you know, could wind up giving you Ebola, or maybe even something worse. So, I've heard that argument, Shubis, that NIH has an Ebola vaccine patent, but for which Ebola? Ebola is it's a moving target. It constantly changes. So they may have a patent for a potential vaccine that may or may not be effective against this particular strain. I read things like that. I've read the articles, and a lot of times the article is being presented by somebody who is known to hyperventilate and put facts behind the story. The story is more important than the facts. Yeah, polio did that. Yeah, the matter of fact, this enterovirus 68, which, by the way, is very, very close. Enterovirus 68, which causes flu-like symptoms, respiratory flu-like symptoms, is actually very close kin to the original polio that people were getting, way back when. The virus is very, very close. Now, what some people are saying is that what we think is enterovirus 68, which is a well-known flu virus that's been around for a long, long time and everybody's known about. We've always known that it was close to polio, but not really polio. What a lot of people are thinking is that enterovirus 68, as it's been brought across the borders by our recent visitors, undocumented invaders, come on, let's face it, okay, these new diseases, a lot of them that were, there's TB coming up all over the place. We had TB pretty much wiped out here in the United States. All of a sudden we got TB clusters all over the nation. We got this enterovirus 68 running rampant. I wonder why all of a sudden maybe it has something to do with the uncontrolled immigration. It used to be right at Ellis Island, before they allowed you into the country, they'd test you for TB, or you had to have a doctor's note saying that you were tested before you got on the boat that you didn't have TB. Matter of fact, you even had to speak a spattering of English. You had to at least be able to write your name and speak basic English before you were allowed in the country. But, that was back in the day when folks here in the United States actually thought we had a culture worth preserving. Today, it appears that what's left of American culture is subject to dispute. Perhaps it's not really American culture. Perhaps we should be Central American culture. I really need to bag it, guys. I've been going for 55 minutes of overtime now. The overtime program has exceeded the length of my regular broadcast. It's time to bag this, package it up for YouTube, and for me to get my jammies on and go to bed. So I want to thank you all for sticking with me and watching tonight's presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and you betcha. We'll see you next Tuesday. We will do some more barking at the moon at that time. Good night, all.
Calling out to you. Won't you turn, won't you turn?